Welcome everybody to the sixth in our quarantine webinar series. I apologize if I might be a little choppy. Despite being hardwired, we are having some internet issues in the area. I'll pause and just ask my panelists if I am choppy, and I'll repeat what I need to. But we're really excited to have you here with us and our expert panelists to talk about hiring and recruiting, onboarding and training, and general communication in a remote work environment. So we have with us today Sasha Connor, Alexis Holder, John Long, and David Weiser, all of whom have tremendous expertise to share. We have Alexis here to talk with us about what it's like being onboarded during COVID. And I actually also asked lots of people, clients and partners, about being onboarded, and they sent me in notes if they couldn't be on about the best and the worst of onboarding for us all to think about as we design programs for our team. In this list is also some feedback from folks on my team who have been onboarded or hired during COVID, which I will share with you and which we'll talk about if we have time for Q&A. So I'm just going to start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves to you today and tell you a little bit about their current role and their career journey. And maybe, John, we could start with you today.
Sure. My name is John Long. I am currently at Russell Reynolds Associates. I focus on recruiting primarily for boards and for C-level roles, mostly in the consumer sector. So think retail, think grocery, but also CPG, and other areas as well. I've spent about collectively 35 years in the retail and consumer industry. I started as an executive and then went to business school and used that as a transition point to becoming a management consultant, where I was for almost 25 years and was a senior partner at Bain & Company before coming on board to Russell Reynolds about 3 years ago now. So that's just a little bit about me, and obviously have spent the last 8 or so months doing a tremendous amount of recruiting and indeed placement and helping people on board virtually. So looking forward to the discussion today.
And one of the things that I want to make sure that everybody on the webinar hears is there is reason for optimism. Companies are having tough times, but they're still looking for great talent, hiring, and in the new normal, onboarding us. And so that's something that I want to make sure we get to today. And of course, working effectively in that environment becomes crucial too. And I know Sasha will talk about some tips for doing that as well. Maybe next we could go to David.
Sure, good morning. David Weiser. I manage a boutique retained firm, coincidentally called Weiser Partners. I actually had somebody a couple years ago say, wow, that's amazing, you joined a firm that actually had your last name. We're a little bit different. We focus more on function versus industry. So most of our work would be anything under a broad marketing umbrella. We do sales, business development work, and also research and insights, which everybody now wants to call data science. Probably 20% of our practice is CEO level search, primarily for mid-market PE firms. So if AT&T wanted a new CEO, they're probably going to call John. They're not going to call us. I did my first search back in the fall of 1994. So it's been a while. And now I'm interviewing people who were in pull-ups when I first started this business. Anyway, that's just a couple of headlines on our firm, and happy to be here today. And we've certainly seen a lot of interesting things happen during COVID, and I know we're going to get into that in depth today. So,
David, just for folks on the webinar that may not know, I always find the jobs that you send our way really intriguing. What do you mean by PE? And what kinds of companies are they?
Sure.
Yeah.
Private equity.
And the companies are.
Yeah, these are generally companies that would have top line revenue, could be as low as 10 or 15 million, up to maybe 100 or 200 million. I mean, we've done work for companies larger than that, but There's a lot of activity right now in that mid-market. A lot of family-owned businesses that now feel like maybe it's a good time to sell. There's a ton of capital. So PE firms are paying a premium for businesses. It's just getting harder and harder as a marketer to avoid looking at a company that's owned by private equity.
And actually, some of the feedback I got are from private equity owned companies that integrated, were purchased by the PepsiCos, the Nestle's, the J&J's of the world, and were integrated into those companies during this. So very good point. People who thought they might have been moving out of big company that actually got bought back into big company environments. Sasha, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha Connor. I am the founder and CEO of Virtual Work Insider. So we teach hybrid and remote teams how to lead, collaborate, and communicate across distance. And we do some remote work strategy consulting as well. And I started my business 2 years ago, so pre-pandemic. And we've been working with companies like Toyota and Vanguard and Beam Suntory, Cisco, et cetera. And as you can imagine, things have really revved up since the pandemic, and how many companies have now had to really rapidly transition into remote work. But I'm actually a marketer by trade. So I started my career working agency side, so at a couple of ad agencies, and then moved client side. And I spent 14 years at the Clorox company. So it's kind of funny that the two things I'm an expert in, remote work and cleaning and disinfecting, are coming in really handy right now. And my remote work story actually ties back to me back in 2010, asking if I could work remotely for Clorox. So I was in the San Francisco Bay Area where it's headquartered, and ended up moving back to the Philadelphia area where my family's from. So I became kind of this remote work pioneer for the company. And that led to me leading large distributed teams from a marketing perspective, new product innovation, even sales, from 3,000 miles away. So this month is actually my 10-year remote anniversary. So I've been working remotely 10 years now, and you know, it's remote work is hard. And I'll tell you, after even 10 years of this, like every day I'm learning something new. So everybody be patient with yourselves and empathetic with your teams as you're going through this transition.
No, I think that's a really good point, and we'll talk more about the emotion involved in remote work and how our lives are so integrated in a way we might never have imagined. Sasha's on her 10-year remote anniversary. We're at 19 with Illuminations, and we did not have the tools that we have today to be effective remote workers. So it's really nice in many ways to have the technology that we have today. It's also intrusive to have that technology and be always on. And if we have time, I'd like to talk a little bit about how do we draw the line when most of us are working from home. And even after the vaccine and we go back, there'll probably be more complete integration. So how do we learn how to draw that line? Alexis, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi all, I'm Alexis Holder. I am currently working at L'Oreal, which I won't really explain, but I am working on the CeraVe brand, which is just a skincare company. And yeah, I started about 2 months ago. So I very much have been onboarded virtually, but prior to that, I graduated from Lehigh University with a marketing major and engineering minor, which is a weird combination, but marketing's definitely my passion. And then through college, I had different experiences. I was a buying intern at a retail company. I was a social media intern when I studied abroad. And then I also did a marketing program in Belgium. So I'm a little all over the place, but I'm very excited to talk with you all. And since I'm more recently in the onboarding experience, please ask any questions you might have.
That's great. And Alexis was kind enough to talk to 2 of my classes recently and tell a little bit about her experience. And I'm going to ask her to do that again today. Now that we've all introduced ourselves, we're going to put up a poll and see who's on with us in terms of executives, students, employed, unemployed. So Brielle, if I can ask you, if you could all take a moment and just answer this poll question 1 for us. And Brielle, do we have to show the second question or can we show the results of this first?
Hey, Lisa.
Yeah.
I see the words
Yeah.
content. I see content and restless. Where is the word thrilled?
Oh, I should have put thrilled instead of content. You're
I'm
right.
kidding. I think it's.
My intention was to say you're not looking, you might be looking, you're definitely looking, to give us a sense of the perspective. But I would put thrilled with mine, and I'm sure we all would do that. Brielle, if you can hear me, if you can show the results of this or go to the next question, unless we lost her. Yeah. Okay. So here's what we're seeing. About half of the folks on the webinar today are content to thrilled, since I didn't ask. About a quarter of them employed but thinking about a move. And another, almost a quarter, 20% unemployed. And then we have some students as well. And do we have another question we can put up in the poll, Brielle?
Yes, hold on one second.
So this is for the executive recruiters on the webinar today. How often, if ever, have you consulted an executive recruiter? Just so they have a sense of, have they or has someone like them interacted with you in the past? And with this level, David and John's, obviously students would not have met them yet, but someday. And maybe you could show this when you feel like we have a good response level. Okay, so almost half have spoken with executive recruiters before, but there's also quite a few of the nevers, 29% with the never but want to learn more, and the nevers overall. Great. So let's close this, and we have one more question about remote work experience and responsibilities, if you could put that up. You can check any of these that apply, I believe, or all of the above. I would check all. No, not layoff. We haven't laid anyone off at Lumination. Okay, and when you're ready, maybe show the results of this. Okay, so almost everybody has had to learn how to interact with folks, motivate them, get their jobs done. Just shy of half have had to onboard or train new hires. That's something we'll talk a little bit about today. And a good chunk have also had to recruit or find talent, almost a third. The furlough and the layoff, one of the hardest things. And I haven't done this at Luminations, fortunately, knock wood. But I have done it in the past, and it's hard as heck, even when you're not doing it remotely, but remotely makes it even worse. So let's close the poll and let's talk about some of these topics. So one of the questions I told the panel I'd want them to talk about is thinking about COVID and how it's impacted habits and practices, particularly in recruiting and hiring. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing out there in recruiting and hiring? And I'll go to John and David first. And then what have you seen that's changed dramatically? What stayed the same? Important things for us to all know about. Maybe I could start, David, with you.
Sure. Well, of course, everybody was pretty anxious in mid-March when this new reality was hitting. You know, we had a few searches. John may have had the same experience that were kind of put on hold. Same thing when the financial markets caved in the fall of 08. You know, everybody kind of panics a little bit. And then a few weeks later, you realize life's going to go on. So, you know, over the last 8 or 9 months, you know, we've probably completed close to 30 searches. But in only 3 of those cases, the hiring manager actually met the new hire in person. Now, if I go back a year, you never could have convinced me that that was going to happen or that that would even be possible. But again, it's been the great equalizer, right? We're all dealing with the same thing. It's kind of leveled the playing field. But life goes on, business moves forward. Some businesses have seen COVID as a tailwind, many as a headwind. But obviously hiring has continued. So actually, from a search standpoint, things have gone faster. You know, we meet people in person, we meet candidates in person at a Starbucks, hotel lobbies. When you eliminate that and move everything to video, you know, that can shorten the cycle of the search 2 to 3 weeks. I also see the same thing on the client side. They're a little more engaged. I think everybody's just taking people matters a little more seriously. So searches have gone on, they've been successful. Although there's still a lot of people who have worked, you know, 3 or 4 months now and they still have not met their boss.
Yeah, and I'll just tag along to that.
Interesting. And we have a question from, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say you know, the pace of search, certainly as companies started coming out of the trough in probably early June, right? Once they had figured out how they were going to survive and get through COVID, they then started to look around at their talent. And a lot of them, you know, have identified, you know, new roles that they actually didn't know they needed, or in fact realized that the talent that they had while they were able to get through certain elements of COVID, they really needed to support further with additional hiring or actually just new capabilities they needed to bring in. And so we've seen a lot of activity really starting in the summer and through now of new searches being opened up. And, you know, to David's point, lots of searches that have been conducted entirely virtually with no one having actually set foot in the corporate headquarters or met people in person, and yet been very, very successful and closed those. So lots happening right now.
Excellent.
Lisa, can I
So
just,
to my point about optimism, after the panic, yeah.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to tack on something
ahead.
to what John said. I think he made a great point that, you know, dealing with COVID has really forced businesses to rethink what capabilities they need. In particular, you know, everything across the digital landscape is more in demand than it ever was before, which is really an issue because supply has always been much lower than demand. I mean, you're talking about, you know, a landscape that's really only been around for 23, 24 years. So, you know, given, you know, the number of retailers that have had to close down, the demand for people who know how to digitally engage customers, who know how to transact online, that capability is really, really in demand. So if you've got that capability, you're out there, you're probably in that poll line that says happily employed. And if not, there's a lot of people want to hire you.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add that we didn't really talk about, which is really not related to COVID, is at the macro level here in the US, a lot of the social unrest has led to very, very proactive corporate sponsorship of diversity and inclusion from the board level on down, which, you know, for us as recruiters has made it, you know, especially I would say, you know, frothy to find, you know, lots of great new talent that maybe hadn't been seen or visible before, which is, I think, for us, very exciting.
So all of this for me, very positive. Maybe a quick panic, but lots of hiring going on, a focus on quick hiring, people not having to travel to be recruited. And I wanted to ask you a question about that. Does that mean that companies are more open to leaving people geographically where they are, or they will ultimately still have to move to a corporate headquarters?
You know, I would just say that it's a good question. I would say that it's really very company dependent. I had a client that we'd started a search before COVID who said they couldn't imagine ever hiring anybody virtually. And so they said, so when this thing ends is probably when we're going to finish the search. Well, they finished it obviously before that because it's not over yet. And I would say that particular company envisions everybody always working at the corporate headquarters. They really can't imagine even coming back from COVID that they'll have a lot of remoteness. However, they have said, they're LA based. If we had somebody that lived a couple hours away, we wouldn't force them to come in every day. We might be a little bit more flexible there. So that's probably the far end of the scale. A lot more companies are being much more open about where they are comfortable having employees work, and that can be sort of anywhere in the country to, hey, it has to be the same time zone.
And I'm still finding it interesting when I see new positions coming through where they actually have a location still listed. I'm in the business of 10 years now, pushing on assumptions, right? Because when I went remote back in 2010, it came with all of these assumptions of you'll never get promoted, you'll never get to work on certain businesses because you have to be here at headquarters. And I spent 10 years saying, why is that true? Let me prove to you otherwise. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for us to be thinking differently and thinking about how we can open up talent pools to have the best talent from anywhere. It doesn't have to be where the headquarters is or satellite offices or even an hour outside. So this is a great opportunity for innovation within thinking about the hiring pool.
Yeah, can I just add on?
So that's, Sasha, very good point. I was going to also read you, David, a question from the group. So go ahead and answer, and then I'll read you.
No, I was just going to say, and I may be kind of stating the obvious here, but this trend has been happening since the mid '90s when Al Gore invented the internet. Once we were tech enabled, once we could access information and communicate remotely, it just became possible to not have to go into a single office to get your work done. And the other thing that I've seen is you get major life events, recession in the late '90s, 9/11, the financial markets caving in 08, 09, and now COVID. And I think what happens is people just get more centered on what matters. And that's your marriage, your kids, your family, your friends, your community. And John's probably seen this too. Over the 25 years I'm talking about, there are fewer and fewer people every year who really want to relocate. It's become a major piece of currency. And what's happened now with COVID, it's finally got companies onto that same page. I think what's going to be really interesting is whether it's Q1 of next year or Q2, which I think is when most companies are forecasting getting back to some, headquarter kind of format. I think there's going to be some fireworks between CEOs and employees, because all those employees who were nervous in March, now most of them are telling us, I can't imagine going back. I've got more time for my kids. I can actually ride my Peloton. They don't miss the commute. They're working longer hours. They're more effective. But I hear a lot of CEOs chomping at the bit, waiting to get the kingdom back together. And I think when those emails go out in Q1 saying, great news, we're getting back under one roof in a month, I think they're going to get a lot of email replies saying, not me.
David, we've already seen that with some of our clients when companies reopened earlier this summer. There was a lot of resistance for lots of reasons. Some still fear, but others really, this is a lifestyle I never imagined for myself at any level, at a junior to a very senior level, and now turning back. I just talked to some folks actually in the military and at the U.S. Postal Service last night. Both the U.S. military and the Postal Service have, for the first time ever, allowed remote work. So somebody from the Department of Defense, who was never able to do anything but go into the Pentagon, is now allowed to work remotely. And he said, why would I ever want to go back there? The traffic is so bad in Washington. So right. I think that's right. And one of the notes that I got here is from someone who started at Google recently. And she said, new people at Google are called nooglers, by the way. And she said most Nooglers would go into the Mountain View campus. Everybody goes, no matter where they're working, no matter what division, for an orientation. But Google embraced the technology and quickly created an orientation that was not actually in Mountain View. And this is the first time they've really done that. And she thinks maybe they'll continue to do that. They won't have to pull people in. People still may want to go, but it will be optional. But she said they did a great job of getting the culture across, even though they're not physically together. And they put her in a cohort of people starting with her, which I think is really important for bonding. And another thing I would talk about in terms of onboarding and training is assigning a mentor, having somebody that you can turn to at all times to ask questions that you might ask if you could turn around and they were right behind you, but you can't. So maybe we'll go to Alexis to talk a little bit about your onboarding experience, and then to Sasha for some best practices.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, just going off of David's last point, I do think productivity wise, like a lot of companies are soaring right now because, like he said, people know their priorities. And if that's your family, your kids, your friends, if you can make that work in your own home and you are more productive, it really is working for a lot of people. And I know Unilever in New Zealand is now doing 4 days in the 4 days working instead of 5, because they've seen a 40% efficiency rate up. So I think this is going to change how we work as a whole. And I know L'Oreal's talking about next year not always having people go into the office and working from at home. And just me right now onboarding, so I am on a week rotation. So L'Oreal has about 6 days a month when you go in, and that's 3 days every other week. And the onboarding in the beginning was really stressful. I think I was fully virtual. I didn't know anyone on my team. And I think that was the hardest part, really not having that one person you can ask questions to constantly. So I think in the beginning, it had to entail me taking a step back and figuring out what needs to happen right now. What do I need to learn immediately? And who do I reach out to? How can I create those relationships early on, where if I have a tech question, I can go to this person. If I have a question on the structure of the company, I can go to this person. And I think it's the pros and cons. I think the con of onboarding is it's isolating in some ways because of that lack of people interaction. However, the pro is you have to force yourself to put yourself outside of your comfort zone. And that entailed me scheduling a meeting with every single person on my 35-person team and doing one-on-ones with them within the first 2 weeks. So I knew who they were, they knew who I was, and asking all of the questions. I think a lot of people always say, you can ask questions whenever you want, and just actually asking those questions. I think a lot of people who onboard, I've noticed just in general, are too afraid to ask those questions that might seem silly, but it's just remembering that we're starting new, and this is a new experience for all of America right now. So it's just putting yourself out there and making sure you have those relationships with HR as well to ask. Like I said to HR, I think that our onboarding needed to be a little better. And I said, I felt like in the beginning, I didn't have someone I could go to for immediate questions. And they're talking about doing a mentorship program, which Lisa mentioned before. So it's just really about putting yourself out there.
Do you feel you did not have a cohort? You started kind of off schedule with the class, right? So you didn't have a group?
Yes, so I started before
I think that
the
makes a difference
program
too.
started officially. So I think I was the first person hired in my program. So I think there was a full month before we had other people in this program. So my onboarding experience was very one-on-one. And I think that's why it was a little harder. And this is new for them as well. But I think I had to learn a lot faster. And now just my relationship with my boss and the daily tasks I do need to do, I understand because I had to just get myself out there early on.
Thanks. So 2 questions, and I know I'm seeing unstable internet here, so I'm going to get them out now. I want to go to Sasha to ask about relationships because they're always important, but more important than ever when you're new in an organization. How do you forge those? And should it be on the new hire to forge them, or are there other systems, other ways to do that? And then we have a question in the chat that I hadn't gotten to. This is for everybody. How are you a good interviewer on Zoom when you might be used to physical cues, the handshake, the direct connection, right now I might be a little distorted because my internet is unstable. So what kind of things can we do instead of using facial management, mannerisms, eye contact to really connect with and assess a candidate via Zoom or Teams or platform of choice? Let's go first to Sasha on the relationship piece, and then I'll see if anybody wants to take the how do we connect better in interviews.
Sure. So just to kind of set the stage as we're talking about this, I'm going to do a screen share and see if this works for a moment. Can you see this on screen right now, the spectrum of remoteness? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So what I wanted to point out here is that a lot of what we're talking about right now was already in play before the pandemic. So most organizations were actually in this middle box here. They were already geographically distributed from a headquarters, satellite offices maybe, or already hybrid where you might have had some people fully remote and some people in office. The big change that happened with the pandemic is a lot of organizations got pushed to a frog, a fully remote organization. And these frogs existed before the pandemic. So some tech companies, for example, had started up as fully remote because they knew the advantages of not having to pay real estate costs or getting the best talent from everywhere. But those frogs actually had the right processes and policies and tools and skills in place to be fully remote. And so a lot of the audience that is on today is probably experiencing that pain from moving from this middle box here over to a frog. And then organizations right now are actually having to be flexible and fluid, moving back and forth between these two, right? As Alexis was talking, they're going back into the office a couple days a week, but not with the whole team. Some are still staying frogs. And also to think about the relationships, so back to your question, Lisa, the relationships internally, but also externally. So a lot of your relationships were virtual with your clients, if you're a service-based company, with your partners, with the vendors. So we were all working very virtually before. So any of the new skills that you feel like you're learning now, they were actually applicable before, and they will continue to be important into the future, regardless of where your company ends up on this spectrum. So then when it comes to actually that relationship building, and that, especially today, we're talking a lot about this onboarding piece, we need to think really intentionally about it. So when you're in an office setting, you have all of that kind of organic intersections that are happening, right? When you're bumping into people in the elevator, on the way to the water cooler, all of that. So a key word when working in these frogs or these hybrid teams is intentionality. You have to really think about, what are the relationships you want to form? What are the intersections that you need to create? Because we are now behind virtual curtains with each other, and we get little peeks in when we're synchronously on video, for example. So a couple of things to think about if you are a hiring manager at a company and you're trying to bring someone in like Alexis. So the first is to help them map out their sphere of influence. Who are all of the people that they need to form these relationships with and influence up, down, across, inside, outside the organization? So at Clorox, I actually was part of the very first double remote relationship in the company. So I had somebody who was working for me who was in Atlanta, and I was in Philly, and the rest of our teams were all in the Oakland headquarters or in a different office site. And what we realized was that it was very hard for the person that was reporting into me to know who it was that he needed to interact with, because he had never been located at headquarters. And so we had to map this out, up, down, inside, outside the organization. Who were the people he needed to reach out to, like Alexis talked about? Then she set up those meetings to connect with them and to start to establish that relationship. And the second part of this too, as a hiring manager, is thinking about the culture. So Lisa mentioned in Google having to help with the culture building. So I think it's important to think about the culture of your company, the culture of your team, in terms of what are the values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that you want to make sure that you're consistently and intentionally role modeling and reinforcing, especially with the new hires as they're coming on board. This is not just camaraderie building. A lot of people mix the two, like culture and camaraderie building. Camaraderie building, meaning those virtual happy hours and let's have fun together. But really the culture building, the value setting, the behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs, that's what really needs to be reinforced as people are coming into the organization, especially remotely.
And Sasha, just to build on that, I find that some companies have not fully defined their culture or values, and so it makes it harder for them to share. So one of the things that we tell companies who are hiring to do is really think about that and make a defined document, one-page statement that you believe talks to your culture and your beliefs, your credo, and then share that with all your new hires. And with some companies, we're actually working on that where they might not have thought about it before because they didn't feel as strongly about having to communicate it. It kind of was assimilated by being in the office. Can I ask David and John to talk about interviewing specifically remotely, things we either as interviewees or interviewers should be thinking about?
I think
Maybe John?
yeah, I think one of the things we've seen is that Zoom for some people is a very natural medium, and they're very comfortable with it. But in many cases, I think Sasha was talking about this, you really do have to think about how do you train yourself, right, to be effective in this medium, because it's very different than interpersonal. I think there was somebody on the chat who mentioned gesticulating, right? Really hard to do that the way we would do that in person. And a lot of the cues that we're used to looking at when we're interviewing candidates or even as candidates are harder, right? Because the shot is only so large. And so what we found is that people are asking for more frequent interactions, right? So it's not just one Zoom interview with a single person. It may be, one in the context of a formal interview, but then another as a follow-up, more of a get to know you kind of a meeting that is less about skill sets and capabilities and more about just personal style, understanding more about you, your family, what are things that you enjoy, and how would you best thrive as an employee. So there's a lot more sometimes that you have to unpack because of the technology that sits in between us now.
And I'm actually going to post
David,
in
anything
the
you would want to add to that?
Go ahead, Sasha.
I'm going to post a link to a blog I did recently with another guest blogger about how to create an inclusive interview experience via video. Because one of the things that we realized when we were doing some research is that while video is great for doing these interviews because you pick up on a lot more cues than not, there's actually an impact that can happen because people who you're interviewing might not have internet access in their home strong enough to do it. They might not have a quiet place to do it. So to make it an inclusive environment, in the blog I put out that we offer a couple suggestions on how to think about this. And one I'll give you, for example, with the hiring manager, if you're asking for the candidate to do the video interviewing, is to actually allow for some sort of tech check ahead of time so that you can understand if the bandwidth is going to be an issue or the sound's going to be an issue, so that you can for the actual interview where you want to make they want to put their best foot forward, that everything is set up and ready to go.
That's a great suggestion. And when we send the follow-up link to the recording of the webinar, we'll include the link to that blog post. Thank you, Sasha, for that. David, you wanted to say something?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a helpful reminder. And even though we're now 8 months into COVID, I'm amazed at how many video interviews I do where, when that camera opens up, I'm kind of shocked at what I see. And at this point, I mean, just to be really harsh about it, there's really no excuse. I mean, let's face it, whatever that room is in your house, it's got to be a home studio. You got to have the right background. You got to have the right lighting. You got to have the right technology. And fair or not fair, whoever's interviewing you, they may not show a level of forgiveness if those things aren't in place. Again, it may not be a fair judgment, but you just don't want to create any distractions. I mean, this behind me, you know, $120, I go to Kinko's and they can whip out a background for me. I'm not suggesting everybody do that, but don't have weird things on a shelf behind you. And, you know, just be cognizant of the fact that you want that interviewer to be focused on your mannerisms, your face, your energy, and the content of what you're saying, and in no way distracted by what's around you. And I'm still seeing day in, day out, some horrific home studio setups.
Well, just to add on that, that's actually why we wrote the blog, because of this some underrepresented groups actually might not have the ability to create these home office setups. And so there's also the piece of like, okay, find a blank wall maybe, or use these virtual backgrounds or something like that to help you, because you might not have the money to, depending on what role you're interviewing for, to actually have that perfect setup. So we need to be, as hiring managers, aware of both situations.
Also, just going off of both points, I think when you're when you're going through an interview process virtually, I think David's right in the sense that you have to be on it now, and since we lack that personal interaction, we really do have to just give it your all. So I think of it, if you take away background and setting and everything, because that is how first impressions are left. If you just think about who you are as a person, you really have to try to let your personality shine in those beginning moments, and the little cues like, how are you, how was your day, how are you doing right now, and just telling them about your background, whether it's your family, your friends, just a little more, because we're not shaking hands, we're not waving to people. Starting off with a smile, your camera being ready, those little things go a long way. And once in an interview I had over the summer when I was looking for this position, like 20 minutes of it, we were talking about her life and what was going on, because people at the end of the day miss those real conversations. So if you can just take a step back and really say, how can I let my personality shine? How can I still make this a personal interaction where they see who I am inside the office and outside?
Yeah, Lisa, let me add just
point,
one more,
Alexis.
one more point.
I'm going to ask.
I was just going to say, if I were to give recommendations to those who are interviewing, hiring managers, CHROs, I actually think video is being used too much right now. I mean, if you go back, you know, pre-video or pre-COVID, you know, the typical process is you have a phone interview, and then if you like what you heard, you bring somebody on site and you meet them in person. And that's always been our process. We'll phone interview somebody. I need to know two things. Can you do the work? Do you have the capability, the skill set? And then the harder part is trying to divine how you're going to fit the company. Do you have the right energy, the right presence, the right attitude? And that is really subjective. So we still recommend to clients in that first contact, do a phone interview. Forget about trying to assess whether, you know, they're going to fit us, or what do they look like, you know, presence-wise, style-wise, energy-wise. Listen for content and capability, and the best way to do that is on the phone. If you like what you hear, then you move to a video. So
that's an interesting idea, that what's old is new. And we also, as Sasha said, we recommend the tech check in advance as well, but we also tell everybody, keep your phones nearby and keep a headset nearby so that you have a backup plan in place. And I think when talking with people, we just made some hires. Those that had a backup plan in place, even if we didn't have to use it, it was nice to see that they were thinking of it and they were ready. A second laptop or a phone nearby with the phone number, and make it easy for people. Make sure when you book a video interview that you also give your phone number. You know, if we get disconnected, call me. Or if you get disconnected, call back immediately. Simple things like that that tell you people are prepared and agile enough to pivot, which they need to do in the workplace all the time. One of my questions, David, you talked about the digital mindset, and we are seeing digital first everything in marketing. As there are many marketers on this call today, what do you look for in marketers in terms of digital expertise? Do they have to have had a position as a digital marketer? Do they have to have been responsible for digital marketing strategy plan, agency relationship? Are you looking for any certifications? I teach in a Master's of Digital Marketing program. I love that program, but it's pretty new. Is that something people should be doing, taking classes at night? What do you think?
Yeah, this is a huge topic, and I'm sure John's been in similar debates with CEOs or CHROs about what you really should look for. I think the pendulum has swung too far. You know, we'll get on the phone with the CEO to discuss a CMO search, and all they want to talk about is PPC and Google Analytics and you know, sprinklers, social platforms, and those are all important. But in our opinion, those are level 2 and level 3 jobs. As a CMO, that's not how you should be spending your time. I mean, digital is a way to target and distribute and engage. It has nothing to do with fundamentally how you position your brand or the value proposition or your messaging or your imagery. And I think as companies have been looking harder and harder for digital first in a head of marketing role, I think they're missing out on some of the foundational experience that you have to have. So yeah, as a CMO, yeah, you have to understand the digital landscape. But that doesn't mean that you had a job title that said Director of Digital Marketing or Director of Social Media. There are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of very notable schools that offer, you know, online certification. And I think increasingly those are becoming meaningful to people. The key is to be able to just, you know, be comfortable in that conversation and be able to articulate that the digital landscape is really kind of taken over. The percent of marketing dollars and the shift towards digital is dramatic. So you have to understand the channels, the tools, the tactics, but that's not what companies should be looking for first and foremost in a CMO, in my opinion.
What cover of the Wall Street? Yeah, okay, thank you. And I'm going to ask John his point of view. Cover of the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and Brielle, we can attach this article too when we send out the email, was about the significant shift in spend to digital for 2020 and expectation it will be the same in 2021. It's funny because I have a classical marketing background too. And while I teach digital and I think it's really important, I always harken back to the fundamentals of marketing, which are about the consumer or the customer. And digital is important, but it's just today's vehicle. It's yesterday's radio or TV.
Right.
And I think it's going to be around for a while, but as great marketers, we have to be strategists, not just tacticians. And so I agree with you. And especially as you get to the mid to higher levels. For the more junior levels, yeah, you're probably going to be doing a dashboard, a Hootsuite dashboard or Google Analytics or something. And that's good. But we, at the mid to higher level, I think if we are doing it, it's probably not good prioritization and organization of our time. John, do you agree, disagree? What do you look for in digital expertise?
You know, I think it's really demonstrated ability, right, to make things happen in a digital environment, whether that's setting it up from scratch or inheriting something and then making it perform better. Really, you know, what I tend to look for and what most clients want are people that drive great results. And so understanding how they've done that in the context of digital, as well as, you know, to your point, it's not like all the other things have gone away completely. Having a respect and understanding for what are all the other parts of the media mix that you have to pay attention to, right? Because they're part of the suite of things that are available to you. But really understanding, you know, right now how to double down and get the most out of digital, because that is clearly, you know, as disconnected as we all are, we're all online a lot more. You could, listen to any number of earnings calls this morning from Kirkland's or from Michael's, and they would tell you that, their digital business is through the roof. And so, a marketer in either of those two companies is going to have to be really facile at understanding, how to make digital work for them, and how to get that return on the investment. It's all the same, right? It's all an ROI. It's just, a different channel to do that from. But I think it's more having the experience doing that. I'm always a little suspect of the classes, frankly. I don't really enjoy people who put lots of different classes all over their resumes. It's not, I could read a book too. It's more about what you did, because that's what clients are really buying.
And that hasn't changed, right? Showing
No.
A propensity to action and real results, that's been around forever. So that's good to hear as people think about positioning themselves and their resumes. I want to go back to one more, how do we operate kind of question. Because as we saw in the polls, a lot of people, whether they're looking for a job or not, are trying to be as effective as they possibly can working in remote teams. And while that might change, or on Sasha's spectrum, while we might shift back and forth to a frog or a hybrid, these skills are going to be really important in the way that we manage our teams or coordinate with our teams going forward. So within your own organizations, is there any practice that you've started or stopped, something that you think is working really well that you would recommend people institute as they try to be effective internally with their teams remotely? Maybe I could start. Alexis, how about you? Anything specific at L'Oreal that you think's working really well that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think in a virtual world, Satya actually said this one time when we were meeting, it's just really great to see people's faces on the screen. So anytime I am having a meeting with someone, I just automatically put my camera on first, so they feel a little pressure to put theirs on. And if I'm hosting a meeting, I say, guys, let's all try to put on our cameras today if you feel comfortable doing so, because I do think it makes a big difference, because you feel like that people are actually listening. And I think the hardest thing about virtual life is you lack that organic interaction with people and brainstorming and knocking on someone's office and saying, hey, can we talk about this quickly? I think what we're really trying to do more and more is just message people. Instead of the emails back and forth, I'll just call someone on my team and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Because I think in a virtual world, the emailing is a lot sometimes, and not everyone can keep up. And I know my boss can't always keep up with the emails. So it's just figuring out how to make it work, not only for you, but your team as a whole.
So finding the right communication mechanism, which may not be email for your team. And cameras on, I agree. I also know at Rutgers, they said you can't ask everybody to put their camera on, because there may be situations where people are uncomfortable with it. So cameras on, with the caveat that if you're not comfortable for some reason, or you're holding or nursing a baby or something, keep your camera off, right? So great input. How about you, John? Anything that you've seen either in your partner organizations or Russell Reynolds that's working really well?
No, we have really adapted pretty quickly to, virtual. And, I would say, I agree. I think we all at least started getting into the video thing a little bit, suspiciously, I think. And I think what we've all realized, it's really kind of, I won't even say the new normal, it's just the way we do business now. And so we've each found, places at our houses where we can have quiet, or at least as close to quiet as we can get in our houses, and set ourselves up to try to make ourselves as productive as possible. So, I think it's just sort of the way things will be, and we'll probably end up going back to the office for some period of time during a week, but it probably won't be full time.
David, anything from your experiences?
Yeah, well, again, we've always used video, because even years ago, if there's a candidate in Hong Kong or Frankfurt, I'm probably not going to fly there to meet them. But this is the big difference for us, is we would always meet kind of that final slate of candidates in person, and we just haven't been able to do that. But like John said, everybody's operating on the same playing field, so there's no competitive advantage or disadvantage to that anymore. It's just all done on video. So that's really been the biggest change for us. My advice to our clients, my advice to any CEO or CHRO who might be listening is to consider that this, work from home is going to be the fourth piece of the compensation package. I mean, up until now, it was, what's the base salary? What's the short-term annual bonus? What's the long-term incentive? More and more people are going to be asking, what's the work from home situation like? And that doesn't mean you have to offer 5 days, but we have situations right now. We have candidates saying, unless I can work from home on Monday or Friday, I'm out. I'm not interested. And I think, and Sasha probably saw this coming a while ago, but I think that is the fourth piece of the compensation mix right now, and it will be increasingly important. So if you want to access the best talent, whether you like it or not, you have to consider that. And on the flip side, since most companies still expect to get everybody back together under one roof, whether that happens or not, I don't know. The best thing you can tell someone like John or I is, hey, I'm relocatable, okay? Now, I may not go to LA, I may not go to New York, but if it's the right opportunity, we can move. When we hear that, it's a game changer because more and more people won't or can't.
Okay. All right. And how about at any level is that true? Can somebody junior, do you think, also say working from home is important to me, or no?
Oh, absolutely. Now that it's like anything else, right? If the base salary is 200, you can ask for 300, but you're probably not going to get it. So regardless of what level we're talking about, I think people should put on the table what they're looking for. And then you've got to be willing to make trade-offs. So I'm not sure it's going to be linked just to level.
Yeah, I don't think it will be either.
Okay, thanks. Sasha, anything specific? You don't either, John. Okay. Anything specific that you want to add about best practices?
Sure. So I'll bring something up on the screen again. Can you see this? It's Virtual Leadership Success Framework.
Yep.
Great. So this is all that we teach off of is based on this like really simple framework for people to think about whether you're going to stay a frog, whether you're a hybrid team, whether you're going to still be geographically distributed. And so these four key areas. So the tech tools and the training, so there's kind of foundational. So you have to have the right tech tools in place. People need to know how to use them and troubleshoot them. So I've seen even with my clients, very quick up the learning curve with the video. So many of my large CPG clients, consumer packaged goods clients, were actually not using video at all, even before the pandemic, and then all of a sudden had to figure it out. So there's a foundational piece with the technology. But then that blue box, so expectation setting. So this came up, Alexis talked about this, Lisa talked about this, in terms of what are our communication norms? Are we a video first culture or not? What kind of communication tools are we going to use for different situations? How do we best leverage asynchronous, meaning not live communication, and synchronous communication, live communication? So putting some new virtual ways of working into place, which is a huge part that most organizations are missing right now. And that's why we're hearing so much about Zoom fatigue and email overload, is because they haven't done the work in this blue box here. Then there's the yellow box, which is relationship building and culture building. I talked a little bit about this already in terms of what is culture versus what is actually just camaraderie building. And then that pink box. So thinking about what are the skills that we've all learned how to do, but under the premise of being within earshot and eyeshot of each other. So for example, we had a great leadership development program at Clorox, but we never actually thought about distance as something that needed to be layered on top of that. So things that we teach are things like, how do you influence across distance? How do you manage a remote report when you're not within earshot and eyeshot of each other? How do you run a really effective and engaging virtual meeting? It's different than everybody huddling together. So organizations really need to be thinking about how are they going to upskill. So as David was saying, people are going to start asking for this remote work as part of the compensation package. Well, you need to have the whole group upskilled on these areas, not just the person who's going to be remote. The whole ecosystem actually needs to know how to operate in this new virtual environment.
Yeah, and just a plug for Sasha in terms of if anybody is thinking of upskilling in some of those areas, Virtual Work Insider and Lumination's great way to do it. I'm going to close because we're at the end of our time together. I didn't get to half the questions I wanted to get to, but I am very, very appreciative of the panel. Two things. They have kindly offered to share their LinkedIn, and we will send that LinkedIn information out in the follow-up to this webinar. If you want to link in, please reference this webinar so they know you're legit when you reach out to them. Secondarily, talking about habits and practices, and we've talked a lot about video. One of the things that we implemented on our team, even before, probably 3 years before COVID, was the walking meeting. So we actually try to physically get out and walk, not stand in front of the computer, not be typing while we're on the meeting. And now, instead of being able to all grab our sneakers, and yes, we have Lumination's black and green sneakers, we set a time, we get our AirPods, and we do it, everybody walks wherever they are, and we do it on the phone. And so cold or hot, unless it's raining or snowing, I encourage you all, because we are having this fatigue of standing or sitting in front of our computers all day, to try it, to try to schedule even a 15-minute walking meeting, assuming there's no kids that will be left alone in the house, and see what kind of results you get. It's just a different perspective. And for us, innovation is always about having a different perspective and a breath of fresh air. So I leave you all with a great big thank you. Tonight would have been our Luminations holiday event for those who normally attend. And we're missing you all and thinking of you all and grateful to have you as part of our extended teams. So thank you to everybody. Watch for the follow-up links and we'll see you all again soon. There's another webinar I encourage you all to come to, January 15th, with two wonderful authors who were early Amazon employees, talking about their leadership principles and how to innovate. All right, take care. Happy and safe holidays, whatever you celebrate. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.